In this video, we're going to start to introduce pointers in C++. Now, we're specifically going to be taking a look at the basic ideas of pointers, and then in later videos, we'll go into the more complex ideas of pointers specifically related to C++, things like smart pointers and those more advanced topics. For now, I just want to get a concept of what a pointer really is and how it generally works. So the idea of a pointer is when we declare a variable in C++, C, really any language, what's really happening is we're setting aside some space in memory, and we're placing the value that's given to that variable inside of that space of memory. So in this case, there's a set of memory dedicated to this value A, and inside of that memory, we have the value 5. Now, it's interesting that in C++ and C and these lower level languages, we can actually get the information about what memory address contains a value. So basically what location in memory has the value. So you know from previous videos that if we were to print out the value A, we would get its value, right? So we get the value 5 in this case. If you put an ampersand in front of this, what you'll get instead is the address of A. It will tell you the location in memory where the variable A is located. So if I go ahead and compile this together, I'll just clear this to make it a bit easier to read. When I print this out, I get this long like 0x7ff value. This here is the location in memory that contains our variable A. Now, this is very useful for us because in a lot of situations, we want to be able to actually reference the memory that contains a variable. There's a lot of different instances, like if we have variables we want to give like a more variable size to, if we have situations where we want to, point to a sequence of values where like one value keeps track of the thing that follows it, pointers become a very useful topic. So although right now it might seem like a really odd thing to do, you'll see as we continue on here that it's actually a really useful thing for us to be able to set up. Now, the idea of a pointer is that we can actually set up a variable to store the address or location of another. That means that that variable literally points to another variable. It points to the location where that variable is stored. So for example, I could create a variable named p, and to indicate that it's a pointer, I put a star in front of it like this. So I say star p equals, and I set it equal to the address of a variable. So I'd say something like ampersand a in this case. That would allow it to store the address of a. So at this point, this variable p points to the location where the variable A is. So the memory location of A is what we're pointing to. To see this in action, we can print just P. That will tell us what the address of A is. So you'll see if I go ahead and put this together, what I'll get as a result is a memory address. And this is the memory address of A in this case. Now, if I want to get the value at that memory address, I simply put a star in front of this. This is called a pointer dereference. What it does is it gets the value that's at the address that P points to. So in this case, you'll see that the result is going to be 5. And there you go. That's exactly what we get. So do you see how this really is just creating a reference to the address of this variable? And if I say star P, then it then gets me the value at that address, which would be the value of 5. Now, there's a lot of really interesting things that end up happening with this. Watch, for instance, if I were to take the value of P and change it. So if I take the value of P and say I were to change the value to be 7, for instance. When I print out star P, we would get the result which we expect, which would be 7. But what's interesting about this is that if I were to print out the value of A, what you'll find is that the value of A will also change. So let's take a look at that. If I print out P and A, they'll both be the same. They'll both be 7. So why is that the case? The reason for that is because you have to remember that the value of P it's storing the location of A. So if I take P and I change its value to 7, so this is saying take the value that P is pointing to and change its value to 7, what happens is I change the memory address location of A to be now storing the value 7. So not only does it change this value here, it's actually changing the memory address of this variable. So it actually changes A. So that's something that's a little bit tricky about pointers. You have to be a bit careful about this. If you were to change the value of a pointer like this, remember that it changes the thing that it's pointing to. So it's changing that memory location. So that's something really important to keep in mind. Now, there are a lot of other interesting things that exist related to pointers. Something that's kind of cool about them is that we can actually use them in conjunction with arrays. So if I were to create an array of values, something like this, for instance, I can create a pointer that points to the first thing in this array of values. So I can point to the address of a at 0. Okay? So we're pointing to the first value inside of this array. Now what that really means is that we're just pointing to the start of this array here. So if I were to print out the value of p now, what I would get is I would get the first value in this array, which would be 1. Oh, and you'll see in this case, I just forgot a semicolon here. There we go. Okay. Do you see that I get the value 1 as a result? Now what's interesting about this is that we can actually get to the next element in the array by adding 1 to the pointer. Since these exist in memory addresses that are next to each other, if I add 1 to the pointer, I end up at the next value inside of the array. And you'll see that I do indeed get 2 as a result. Now, if I want to get to the value after 2, instead of adding 1, I just add 2. And I can keep sequentially doing this and iterate through the array in this exact way. That's a really interesting thing to be able to do. And you'll see that this sort of idea, as well as the idea of changing values based on their pointers, is something that we're going to be using throughout our process of learning and programming in C. So hopefully this helps you understand a bit more about how pointers generally work inside of C. Or inside of C++ rather. It's very similar to pointers in C. It's almost the exact same, I think. But you'll find that C++ has a few other features that we'll discuss as we continue on that are going to help us with programming effectively with pointers. So thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.